Привет, друзья! G'day guys, welcome to another Soviet lens review. Today, we're going to be taking a look at two lenses. One of them from Japan and the other from the Soviet Union to find out who really made the best 135mm lens. So, let's get into it. So guys, let's jump into it. We've got two lenses here. The first one is our Hanimex 135mm f2.8 from Japan, made in 1973. And our Soviet contender today is the Jupiter 37A, made in the 70s as well. This one was made in 1979. So I've tried to pick lenses here which are from the same decade. Both of these lenses did have improvements and newer versions come on later in life, but we've got them pretty much in the same decade here. This one, of course, being made for the Moscow Olympics, the Jupiter. But first off, let's talk about build quality. And that's where both of these lenses actually do really, really well. The Hanimex here, starting off with its aperture ring, I actually have got to say that this aperture ring is nicer than most Soviet aperture rings. It is clicky, and you can hear the clicks there. Every half stop, you get a nice solid click, but it's still very easy to turn. No issues with the aperture ring there whatsoever. The focus ring as well on the Hanimex, very smooth, nice, easy to grip rubber. The only complaint I have about the Hanimex is its lens hood, which I think has assumedly been dented or dropped a few times over the course of its life, which means it's a little bit tricky to pull out just like that. Aside from that, very good build quality. The Jupiter here has great build quality as well. I absolutely love my Jupiter 37A. The aperture ring still super smooth. The focus ring still pretty smooth. You do have to turn it with a little bit of force, but I find that helps rather than hinders to get that perfect level of focus that you need with the 135mm. And overall, it just feels like such a solid, well-built, beautiful lens. And, a few things with the Hanimex, like the sticker, the quality control sticker there is wearing off a little bit as well. So I really had to give the build quality battle to the Jupiter there, just with a slight edge in terms of build quality. Now though, let's have a look at some photos to see how the sharpness of the Jupiter and the Hanimex compares. Okay guys, we've got some photos here to take a look at. This one is of a parrot taken with the Jupiter 37A. He's looking great. He's looking nice and sharp. Perfect example of what the Jupiter 37A can do. Both of these photos taken at f3.5. Let's go ahead and bring up the same photo taken with the Hanimex. So the Hanimex is on the right, Jupiter's on the left, and we can see when we zoom in there, the Hanimex, it is falling apart a little bit at those high contrast areas on the bark. It does not like high contrast areas whatsoever, the Hanimex, and they don't really disappear until you stop down all the way to around about f8 or even f11. So you can see they are degrading the image quality quite severely. But in terms of sharpness here, we can see the parrot right in the middle of the frame, definitely in focus for both of these images. It's just not quite as sharp on the Hanimex, and we'll see this in later images as well. But in terms of sharpness, the Jupiter is definitely sharper than the Hanimex here, so that gets the edge. Let's go ahead though and take a look at bokeh. So let's go ahead and bring up some images here, two images in fact, taken at f8, because we saw the bokeh there at f3.5. It was quite similar, and again, this is a very challenging background for both of these images. Lots of highlights, lots of foliage. So both of these shot at f8, so we can really see what the bokeh turns into. The Jupiter on the left here, we can see it's really coming through with its 12-bladed aperture. All of those bokeh balls, even at f8, super round, super soft, and it's dealing with those highlighted areas very nicely. Meanwhile, on the right here, the Hanimex, you can tell with those hexagonal bokeh balls that it only has that 6-bladed aperture, and that is, I wouldn't say it's hurting it, but it is causing that shape to be more geometric than just circular here in the Hanimex's bokeh. And you can zoom in, and I actually think these are quite nice bokeh balls for being hexagonal. And sometimes you might want to get some hexagonal bokeh in your shot. I don't think that every shot always has to have circular bokeh. And when you compare both of these shots and also both of the initial shots as well that were shot at f3.5, I actually think it's too close to call in terms of bokeh. So for both of these lenses, I'm going to give them an equal score in their bokeh. Next up though, we have got a pretty interesting test here. This is testing both of these lenses longitudinal chromatic aberration. That is the sort of purple and green color fringing that you see in out of focus areas of the image. Great example of that is in this book here. Let's go ahead, zoom into 100%. We've got the Jupiter on the left, Hanimex on the right, and you can see right here the Jupiter is very well corrected. Very slight kind of blue cast here, but on the Hanimex side on the right, we can see it right there that it is a lot stronger. And we can see here on this illustration in the book that the Hanimex is displaying a little bit more of that kind of yellow-green sort of aberration pattern in the far out of focus areas past the plane of focus. And if we zoom out just like that, I think you can really tell that the Jupiter is just dealing with this so nicely. So the point here for distortions definitely has to go to the Jupiter. And before we forget, a quick comparison of both of these lenses' vignetting characteristics. So first up, let's take a look at the Hanimex, and this is shot from f3.5, and you can see there's definitely some vignetting there. Stop it down one stop, it almost goes away. Stop it down another stop to f5.6 and it's pretty much gone, and it does not improve on the Jupiter after f5.6. Whereas if we move to the Hanimex here, we can see at f3.5 there is some vignetting, and again f4 there's still a little bit. F5.6 it actually hasn't completely gone away, and it's not until that f8 mark that we actually see that vignette finally leave the picture for the Hanimex. Next up, we have got some bloom tests, and we always love a good test of flaring and bloom in these older vintage lenses. Sometimes Soviet lenses don't perform too well under harsh lights, and well, the Jupiter 37A, we can see here, it is not doing too badly at all. This is two shots, both shot at the exact same aperture, f3.5, with a nice strong light source at the back of the frame. Jupiter on the left, Hanimex on the right, and we can see here that the Jupiter is just handling this so much nicer than the Hanimex. You can zoom in there, and on the Jupiter you can absolutely make out all of those little kind of honeycomb pattern areas of the light, whereas the Hanimex, it is just a big flare off, and not the nice kind of flare either. Now I will put up some video here that shows the Jupiter. It does have a kind of a different weakness when it comes to flaring, where the flare can come into the lens even when it's at a very oblique angle to the lens itself, and that can ruin the image. But I think overall straight up resistance to backlight, judging from these two images, got to give the point here again to the Jupiter. Next up though, we've got an image that just ties everything together. This is a shot of Perth City that I took yesterday, and we've got again the Jupiter on the left, the Hanimex on the right here, and you can just see the differences between these two lenses, particularly at maximum focusing distance. So the Jupiter here, it is retaining so much more contrast. I mean, you can see it in the histogram as well, but look down in these little kind of rooms here on the building. They are nice and dark. There's a lot of contrast there. Meanwhile, on the other side, on the Hanimex, it just looks really washed out. You can see some fringing on the windows there. You know, it just looks like you've got to kind of filter over the image, which I most definitely did not have. And if we zoom in to the corners of the image here as well, it again shows that the Hanimex's image quality is falling apart. You know, this building here almost doesn't look like it's in focus on the Hanimex, even though it is. And on the Jupiter, it is looking crisp, it is looking sharp. I mean, you can literally see into these apartments on the Jupiter, and that is from very far away. You know, you can see a chair there or something. And the Hanimex in the corners as well, it is showing that it is not particularly sharp at f3.5. So this is a perfect example of the overall image quality between the Hanimex and the Jupiter. I think to sum it up, The Hanimex, it produces a vintage image quality. The Jupiter, even though it was made in the same decade in the 70s, it is producing an image that looks comparably modern. And with all those factors combined, I think it's pretty safe to say that between these two lenses, the Hanimex, well, it falls out into second place and the Jupiter is the king. So there we go, two great lenses in their own right, but when it's all said and done, I have to give it to the Jupiter 37A here. The really well corrected distortions, the lack of fringing, the beautiful bokeh with those 12 aperture blades really just lets it top the Hanimex here. And I do love the preset aperture, and I think it personally looks like a bit of a sexier lens as well, the Jupiter. So there we go. The Jupiter wins, the Hanimex with a very close second place, so can't go away disappointed. And I think when I get around to doing this test with a more updated Hanimex that I do have from the early 90s, well, that could give our next Soviet lens a little bit of trouble. But for now though guys, thank you very much for watching. Chuck us a like, tell me what you want to see for the next Soviet lens review, and until the next time, I'll see you then.